Hey everyone, I just want to, in this presentation, go over the basics of market economies and talk about what we think is, what a market economy is, what the moving parts are, what the requirements are. And this is all from the point of view that market economies exist, one, and from the point of view of what is conventionally referred to as economics. It just that's we without putting a western in front of it or that we used to do. uh, if you go into your econ department at a university, uh, certainly in an English speaking country, they're going to all basically talk about study markets. They're going to have the kinds of things that you took in econ 101 as an undergrad, and they're going to have this point of view. They frequently aren't going to talk about some of the things I'm going to talk about, because very often they assume a lot of what we're going to be talking about, or I'm going to be talking about here. But this is basically the neoclassical view, how we think market economies work, to a certain extent why we think they're good, and what it takes to have them be functional, and that is to say, quote unquote, good. So call it Smithian, call it neoclassic, call it Western, call it whatever, but this is an overview of markets. Okay. Oh, what are we going to talk about? What are the moving parts here? Uh, in this presentation, I'm going to talk first about the micro foundations. That is at the person-to-person level, the small, the building blocks of an economy, which are there's the foundation of security and property rights. Then there's the unit of voluntary exchange of one person exchanging with another. Then I'm going to talk about institutions, money, and markets, and talk about what institutions are, their regularized patterns of behavior. We'll get into that. And then I'm going to talk about the macro structures, how the whole thing at the societal level works, where prices come from, how the invisible hand works, supply demand, last with grass. And that's, you know, uh, just a skeletal overview of markets, but it's going to take a long time to get through, so let's keep going. Okay, first and foremost, for a market economy to exist, there needs to be security. There has to be basic security in the society, and all of liberal economics, and that's another term we can use here, liberal economics, not left-wing liberal. And it's very often used as a pejorative term in the United States. This is liberal in terms of Adam Smith and John Locke and dead guys in wigs, and that is often what we're talking about in IPE. So when you encounter the L word, you've really got to shift gears and think what they're talking about is liberal, and in general much closer to what libertarians talk about today. And that they tend to be the manifestation of the core tenets of classical liberalism. That's another way you could call it classical liberalism. But in academia, we just say liberal and we know what we're talking about. Okay, liberal economics, which is, again, any economics, you go into an econ department, that's what they're teaching, assumes, they just assume that people can't take your stuff or coerce you. Okay, they're going to assume that there's a rule of law, and that that when you engage in economic activity, you don't have a gun to your head. Someone hasn't kidnapped your daughter or whatever. Okay, and that people aren't busting in and taking your stuff. So banditry, not what they study. That is a core thing. You got to have that to have a market economy, which is basically built on people engaging in voluntary exchanges. And when someone comes and takes your stuff, that's not a voluntary exchange. And so this is a big thing. And there's a saying out there that economics is built on the solved problems of political science, in that, in most of history, there hasn't been security. And in a lot of places around the world, there isn't security. And so you got to have that first. And doing that, economics doesn't help you with. Property rights. You got to have property rights too. Not only do you have to be secure in your stuff in person, but you've got to have an acknowledged right, and very often a defined right, to trade or sell what you have. And there's basically three types of property rights. One is use rights, your ability to use something, and more importantly, your ability to exclude other people from using something, right? I mean, theoretically, anyone can use anything that's lying around. It's when you say, no, that's mine, you can't use it, that you have a use right. And in fact, very often in the legal system, if you don't now and then tell someone that they can't walk across your property, well, guess what? You've lost the right to exclude it. So, the excluding people is the big thing. It's kind of expressed as a negative. Then there's income rights. That's your right to rent something, right? To make money off of it, to rent or lease it, right? So you have to, that's a different type of right. Then there's transfer rights. That's your right to sell something or give it away, to transfer the ownership to someone else. And all three of these types need to be developed, need to be in place for a market to work. And very often they aren't. In various societies, you will find use rights established. There may be, in a traditional culture, a family has the right to collect firewood from this part of the forest and to till this plot of land, but there may not be any mechanism for them to sell it or rent it, right? And in their society, and eventually in their legal system. And so the lack of defined property rights can be very problematic. Also, you frequently need to create definitions of new stuff, like, when we talk about, there are very often things that you didn't think of as being property, like the electromagnetic spectrum, right? Frequencies. They weren't a thing that anyone owned at one point, but eventually a lot of people wanted to use them, and you had to have a definition of the property and a definition of who owns it and under what terms can they sell it. And that's been a big part. Defining that, setting up a market for the electromagnetic spectrum has been a big deal over the past few decades. So this is something that very frequently we look to governments to do. And these things, the security and the definition of property rights, are very much a foundation for a functioning market. Voluntary exchange. This is it. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the basis, the core unit of a market, is voluntary exchanges between individuals. And in fact, markets are an aggregation of the society's voluntary exchanges. And now they eventually add something in terms of when they start setting prices, they become more than just the sum of all of these things. But at the basic level, a market is a collection of voluntary exchanges. Voluntary exchanges are viewed very favorably in economics because it's assumed that they're mutually beneficial by the nature of them being voluntary, right? Just by fact. And it's assumed that when one person exchanges a good or service with another, they're only doing it because they want what they're getting more than what they're giving up. And, if you're in school and you trade an apple for a banana at lunch, presumably you wanted the banana more than you wanted the apple. And conversely, whoever you're trading with wants the apple more than the banana, right? And, you want what you're getting more than you're giving up. And this is, by the nature of it being a voluntary exchange, this is considered to be a fair assumption. Now, there are a whole bunch of other things that come into play that I'll talk about in a different presentation, but this concept, it's actually got a name in economics. It's called Pareto efficiency. Pareto is a guy. Okay, I looked at it and said, what's Pareto mean? What's the Latin root of that? Is it a Greek term? What's going on there? And then, no, it's just this guy's name, and he was the first one to talk about it. But Pareto efficiency refers to an exchange that makes both parties better off, right? That quality of making both people better off. And there's even something called Pareto optimality, and that's a situation in which all possible Pareto efficient exchanges, all possible interactions between people in the society that would make both people better off, both parties to the transaction better off, would occur, right? And in fact, that is largely what you try to do. You try to encourage more transactions, because as people trade more and more, they take what they've got, by rearranging it amongst them each other, they maximize the benefit that people are getting. And by people, I mean the members of the society are getting out of the material they've got to consume at any given point in time, right? So improving increasing the number of exchanges, improving the efficiency of exchanges, making sure that more Pareto efficient exchanges are occurring, is a way to make everyone, to make people in the society better off without actually changing what you've got. And the best example of this is when a bunch of soldiers get together and they open up their, if they're together and they're eating lunch out of their meals ready to eat, their MREs. Everyone's got stuff. They open up, they got all these packets, and they exchange back and forth. And by wheeling and dealing, you get a better lunch, and everyone gets a better lunch. And these are voluntary exchanges. You generally, are engaging in them to make, yourself better off. Meaning, if I exchange a packet of cheese spread for a packet of peanut butter, presumably it's because I like the peanut butter more than the cheese spread. And whoever I'm dealing with is exactly the opposite. And we end up both having a better lunch out of the deal, even though there's no change to the basic material that exists that we have to eat, right? And taken writ large, it's like, hey, we've only got so much stuff in the world, so much ability to make it, and we have a given, endowment of resources and technology to use them. And through a more efficient market set of exchanges, we can make ourselves better off, right? If we can do things to improve this. So that's why it's so important, and things like efficiency are just, so important in economics. And they have a meaning that we don't, we think efficiency is just like, oh, that's just a slightly better way of doing something, right? Whereas they're talking about, no, it's being better off in general. The key thing is voluntary exchanges in a market economy and in the models of them are the primary social means by which people make themselves better off, right? If you want to make, and by better off, we generally tend to mean materially better off. And so it's not for nothing that liberal economics, liberalism, modernism, which is what liberalism's part of, is there's a materialism, right? We measure being better off in terms of having more stuff, not necessarily in terms of social status, which is not something that economics studies, or divinity, or dare we say happiness, but rather, do you have more stuff that you want, right? And when you want more stuff or better stuff than you've got, how do you go about doing it? You go out and you engage in voluntary exchanges with people. You try to sell something. You try to get a better job. You try to, invest in something. And all of these are voluntary exchanges between you and somebody else. And that's the key, the key unit of the economy. Okay. So far, I was just talking about voluntary exchanges in terms of, hey, I give you an apple in exchange for an orange. Well, there's money. Right? Now, money is an institution, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about institutions in general, but it's a medium of exchange, right? And we could talk about it without talking about institutions. It's a medium of exchange that simplifies exchange by breaking it into two parts, and that is people sell what they produce for money, and people buy what they want to consume. And now we can talk about selling and buying as opposed to trading. And the key thing is, if I've got if I'm a farmer, and I frequently use these examples because they evoke kind of medieval pre-money era. If I'm a pig farmer and I need some chickens, right, because I want eggs to go with my ham and bacon, I got to find, if there's no medium of exchange, I've got pigs to trade for chickens. Well, I got to not only find someone with chickens that they're willing to give up, but they have to be willing to give that up in exchange for pigs. Maybe they don't want pigs, right? Or it could be parts of pigs, for hams, but still, maybe they don't want the pigs. And so, it's more complicated to trade something, right? Because you've got to not only find someone who's got what you want, but you have to find someone who wants what you've got. When we bring money in to the equation, or a medium of exchange, whatever that is, but we might as well just call it money, whatever form it takes, we break these two things out. And so I sell my pigs to anybody, right? I just have to find somebody who wants pigs. And I find people who really want pigs the most, I get the most money. Yay. And then I go with the money and I find someone who's got chickens. And, do they want the money? Of course they do, because it's a medium of exchange. They can buy anything they want with it, right? And so it makes it much easier to do transactions. That means more transactions occur, more voluntary exchanges, more people better off. Yay! That's what we're in this for. That's the holy grail of economics, is more voluntary exchanges. So, like I say, it simplifies the search for trading partners. It also, though, starts creating socially, and this is something economists don't talk about, but I think it's worth mentioning, we start now having social impacts. We talk about selling and buying, but we also talk about roles created, and economists definitely talk about this, the roles of producers and consumers. And we start talking about them because we separated out the production from the consumption in a way, right? We've got two things going on, the selling of your pigs and the buying of the chickens. And in one case, you're the producer. In the other case, you're the consumer. And so we create this kind of differentiation, because at some point, almost everyone's a producer and everyone's also a consumer. But we're going to talk about these two groups as if they're separate. It also enables quantitative pricing, right? Once we have money, we can put a number on things. And in fact, historically, that's been a huge deal. Once you have a common medium of exchange, you can quantify the value people trade things at, if not place on different things. And, you can compare things. And how do you compare apples to oranges? People say, oh, you can't compare apples to oranges. With my long exposure to economics, even though I'm not an economist, I just already am like, oh, sure, what's the price? Right? That's how we compare them. And how much per pound for apples, how much per pound for oranges. And that has been has a big impact on, people. It helps them make decisions about what to buy, what to produce. It also has greatly enabled governments. The rise of the nation state, in a lot of ways, was facilitated by the fact that you had money, a money economy taking hold, and you could now tax things, and you could tax a percentage, and you could say what something is worth. And whereas before, percentages of crops, well, you could have percentages, but what's one crop worth versus another? And you could also, once you had money, the process of taxation became much easier. It became much easier to pay taxes because you could pay them in something. And one reason back in the day that prior to the revolution that people really didn't like taxes might have been like 3%. of a person's income. And, we went to war over this. Well, the problem was that most of your income was based on barter, and you only had, you might be taxed on your farm 8 shillings a year, and in the whole year you might only see 12 shillings go through your house because you were bartering with your neighbors. As the money economy takes over, it's easier for people to pay taxes, it's easier to collect taxes, it's easier to have a large government. Now, you might think taxes are bad, but if you can't raise taxes, you can't fight wars, you can't run a government. And so at the foundational level, there was a big advance to that. So quantifying things has a big impact on the world. Okay, the institution of markets. And here I'm going to get a little more into what an institution is. And that first line, that's the definition. It's a rule or pattern of behavior that facilitates large numbers of exchanges. And in fact, an institution could be any set of rules that people tend to follow. And with money, the rule of money is written on the money. This is legal tender for all debts, public and private, in the sense that, what's the rule, the pattern of behavior in the institution of money is everybody buys and sells things with the same money, right? That you can only buy and sell things for dollars. And, even people who are hoarding gold, turns out you really can't buy things with gold. You have to sell the gold for dollars and then use the dollars to buy stuff. And the key thing is that while you may look at money as being a physical thing, it's the institution, the rule, the pattern of behavior, or more importantly, expected behavior. Because I'm going to sell things for money if I expect other people will take that money in exchange for the things I want, for giving me stuff, right? So I'm going to sell for dollars if I can use dollars to buy. And in fact, if everyone is selling for dollars, then I need dollars. I got to have dollars to buy stuff. See how there's behaviors in here and expectations of other people's behaviors. And that's what an institution is. It's a set of rules that, we expect people to behave, to follow. And, the simplest example, which side of the road do you drive on, right? In the United States, in most of the world, we drive on the right side of the road, and we expect other people to drive on the right side of the road. That's a rule. That's and thus is also an institution in this sense. And by the way, you violate that institution at your risk, right? And there's no incentive to violate that rule if you expect other people to be following it, right? Unless you want to be in a head-on collision. Markets. What's the rule of a market? You might, what's that? We have farmers markets, and in here I live in Fayetteville, and there's a farmers market, and basically there's a parking lot with a sign that says farmers market here Wednesday from noon till 3 or something. I don't quote me on what the hours are, and the rule, that's all it is. It's an expectation that farmers are going to show up here Wednesday at noon to sell you stuff. And if you want to buy stuff, you should show up here Wednesday at noon. And so that's all it is. It's a mutual expectation that we're going to do business in farmer stuff, and in produce at this place and time. Very simple thing. And historically, it's been, Saturday behind the church, Saturday, and in fact, frequently Saturdays became they kind of zeroed in on a day that you would have that, Saturdays at the crossroad, right? Or maybe at harvest time, there were larger markets or fairs that would occur at less regular intervals, but it was a time and a place that you would expect people selling and buying to be to be there. And the thing is, this is huge. Once you start having these things, it simplifies voluntary exchange. You can work the rest of the week and then go to the market on one day, right? And so you don't have to think about what day of the week you're going to go try to trade your pigs for chickens. And you don't have to worry about wandering all over the countryside looking for people. And they're going to be there. Anyone who wants to do business is going to be behind the church on Saturday or at the crossroads or whatever the rule is in your local area. And this greatly simplifies things. And it's the growth of towns and population centers that have these markets that really gets things going. But the key, so that's at one level that was great. At another level, as people started trading goods regularly, especially similar products, chickens, bales of wheat, bolts of cloth, as similar products are exchanged more and more, people started getting prices. And prices are a huge innovation, right? Because you combine, and prices, by the way, you need markets and you need money, right? So you need both those institutions. But when you have them, people start observing, hey, there's a pattern to these exchanges, and we tend to see bottles of wine are going for 2 livres, right, or francs, or whatever the local currency. I'm still got this medieval thing going in my head, and as that information gets promulgated, it simplifies the transactions. Once there's an idea that, hey, this is what it's going for, then we don't have to bargain as much over it, right? And it simplifies things. And in fact, historically, once Amsterdam became the center of trade in Europe, things were being traded in Amsterdam. All sorts of things were being traded in Amsterdam every day of the week, except Sunday. And what you had entrepreneurs in Amsterdam that would go around, and from all the individual merchants, they'd keep tabs on what things were selling for, what contracts were being let, what's wheat going for per bushel, right? What's barley going for per bushel? And they would make these entrepreneurs would collect the information and then add in once printing presses are around, and they had printing presses by the time Amsterdam became a big place. Hey, we can make sheets and send that information out all over Europe, and people can see, hey, what is the relative value of a bushel of wheat versus a bushel of barley, right? What can I get for my wheat in Amsterdam? And now, of course, I got to get to Amsterdam with it, but that kind of gives me an idea of what I should be selling it for locally. And so prices, and this happened, and the price sheets for Amsterdam are found all over the ancient libraries in Europe. This was a huge thing because it simplified negotiations. It gave people a mutual expectation of what things are worth. It also gave them information about the value of doing one thing versus another, growing wheat versus barley, and engaging in moving things from place to place. What are things worth? And having that information really helped. And so this, prices are what comes, markets start out as a simple institution, but they end up giving us prices, which then really changes the society, makes things more efficient, allows for people to make better decisions, and gets the ball rolling. Now, I don't want to give you the idea that markets are perfect. We do talk about Pareto optimality, right? When all possible exchanges in a market are made. And again, back to the MRE example, I had a student, I was trying to explain this concept of Pareto optimality, and the student said, yeah, well, it's just like when you're trading MREs, there's, for a couple minutes, everyone's furiously trading, and then it kind of dies off with one guy going, anyone want to trade peanut butter? Got peanut butter? And everyone avoids looking at him, and they start eating lunch. He said, it's just kind of like, yeah, we get to the point where we can't, trade anything, making both people better off, and we're done. Pareto optimality, I like to say, is not utopian. It's just efficient. It's making the best out of an MRE lunch. And, I say it's optimal, but you're still eating MREs, right? So don't put too much in that. But also, there's this idea of market clearing. You know, a, if you've got a market price and you're selling stuff, and people know what the prices are, we should not, we should have everything, everything that people, if wheat is selling at uh, uh, 5 marks per bushel or 100 bushels, I don't know what a mark was worth. Uh, Probably Amsterdam mark, franc. Point is, if I'm selling at 5 marks, if I'm offering to buy it and they're selling it, it should be that all the wheat that you want to buy at 5 marks is bought, and everyone who wants to buy it at 5 marks buys it at 5 marks. Everyone who wants to sell it at 5 marks sells it at 5 marks. And that's called market clearing. We clear the market out. There's no stuff left around. There's no surplus. We do, however, observe something called market failures. Market failures occur when people over or underproduce, given the market price. And the classic example is at Christmas when somebody has produced a toy that suddenly every kid wants and you can't buy it for love or money. And it sells out, right? That's because these guys won't raise the price, because you raise the price on a kid's toy and your name is mud forever. But they just didn't anticipate the demand. And so there are a lot of people who want to buy the toy at the original price, but the manufacturers didn't make enough because they didn't know, right? And that's a market failure when supply and demand don't line up. It only is a market failure because you don't adjust the price. If you adjusted the price up and down, you wouldn't have that. That's normally what happens with a good, but we have this weird thing of they won't change the price. So we do get market failures, and those are generally considered bad. And the manufacturers of whatever toy is popular that year wish they'd made more, but they didn't know, right? And the reason you have these failures is that it's hard to anticipate demand, right? Of kids, right? God only knows what kids are going to like. The institution of markets, though, this is what they are. They are built on voluntary exchanges. They arise from just the simple farmers markets of old, but they created other advantages that increase the number of voluntary exchanges. They spawned prices that have an impact on the society, and wonderful markets are wonderful. Okay, and I said markets are wonderful in the last slide. There's a little irony in that. Okay, we could debate how, but in general, they're seen as being the most efficient way of doing of producing things. We talked about prices, and you got this supply and demand, and this is an important thing. The law of supply and demand, right? The law of supply is that the amount of goods extant, that means existing producers are willing and able to supply at any given price, right? That's supply. Right, so we talk about increasing supply in the society. We don't mean that there's more stuff. We usually talk, or economists talk about it and say, well, there's more ability to produce, right? And so we can increase supply by either making more producers or by having some kind of technological advance that allows you to produce more stuff. Very often, we talk about more producers. We can also talk about throwing more labor at it, more resources at it. And so laborers are producers. We don't think of them, we think of management versus labor, but both of those roles are embedded in producing. And so when we, very often we talk about the supply of the society as their ability to produce stuff. And it's a moving target. It can be increased generally by putting more stuff into it, but also by technological innovation. Institutions, innovation in institutions can, you come up with something like just-in-time delivery. You come up with something called Amazon. There are things that can go in and increase the ability to supply stuff. Amazon, not so much about supply. That's more about meeting demand. But the law of supply, right, is that supply is directly related to price. And here, the term directly related means when one goes up, so does the other, right? And so the law of supply is when the price goes up, producers will produce more. When the price goes down, producers will produce less. That's a direct relationship. And this is the key thing here is given nothing else changes, right? Given that we have the same number of producers, same technology, same level of resources, if the price goes up, they'll supply more. If the price goes down, they'll supply less. Oh, by the way, if you want them to supply more, the price is going to have to go up, given that the same amount of resources and technologies are in play, right? Given nothing else changes, if you want more stuff, you got to pay more. Furthermore, if you do something to lower the price, which is what people are constantly asking governments to do, so producers will produce less, okay? And that's the law of supply. Now keep in mind there are shifts in the supply curve. If you get in things I mentioned before, if you get more resources, if you get maybe the labor supply goes up in your country, or if you get in a technological innovation, that can create a shift in the supply curve. And shifts can be positive or negative. It can shift so that more is offered at any given price, or it could shift if there's a shortage, or maybe employment. If the labor force shrinks, you might be able to you might not be able to produce as much at the same price, and that's a shift in the supply curve. So keep that in mind, that the law of supply has that caveat. It's a short term, given the current resources. You can over time have shifts in the supply curve, both to the good or ill. Demand, the amount of goods extant existing consumers are willing and able to buy at any given price, right? That's the demand. And so we talk about demand in the society. We can talk about stimulating demand, right? That people want to buy more stuff at any given price. So if everyone's, if wages go up in the society, well, people have more money. Yay! They're willing to buy more stuff at any given price. By the way, if the number of people in the society go up, generally as populations grow, demand for goods increases. That's a kind of a secular trend in these things. So we can talk. So my point here is we talk about supply and demand as things, right? So we talk about stimulating supply, making it easier to produce more stuff in the society. We can also talk about stimulating demand, creating more demand in the society, usually by giving people more money in one way or another. The law of demand is that demand is inversely related to price. As the price goes up, people want less. As the price goes down, they will want more of any good. And that's generally, a thing there. That should be self-evident. And again, we can talk about shifts in the demand curve. And I mentioned if the population increases, guess what? There'll be a shift in the demand curve. If we do something to stimulate demand, we're going to get a shift in the demand curve. And so you've got two things. We're going to talk about policies or people. I don't know if we will, but you will come across people talking about demand side and supply side policies that try to stimulate one or the other, right? If I want to do something to give people more money, maybe I'll cut taxes, maybe I'll cut interest rates so that there's more money available to them. If I can do stuff to stimulate demand in the society, That's a demand size thing, and putting more people to work is always a good thing. Governments also can spend money. They can give people money. Right? If you just increase spending, that will stimulate demand in society. Then there's supply side, which is, well, we're going to stimulate the supply in the society. So we're going to do things that will encourage producers. So we might seek to, lower interest rates so it's cheaper for them to invest. We can do things that we can cut the taxes on producers and let them keep more of their stuff so they make a bigger profit, and therefore they will be willing to produce more stuff because they'll get, we're effectively giving them more money at the same price by changing government regulations. That will stimulate supply. Both things are important. By the way, supply and demand, both things are important. They need to be in balance. And to be a supply sider or a demand sider is to be a broken clock. And you're going to be right at one time or another, right? Maybe a broken calendar. But, the two need to be balanced. And it's important for society to have growing demand and growing supply, and they need to grow in balance. And so to be a staunch supply sider, as to be honest, often Republicans tend to be in this camp, or traditional establishment have tended to be supply siders, is great if supply is short, but it might not be. And in fact, in the recent global recession, you could argue that it was not a supply problem, it was a demand problem. Similarly, to be a demand sider, and there are less of these guys around, although Robert Reich is the classic guy. He always, and Keynesianism is associated with demand side. He's always, every solution he's every problem he's ever had or ever heard him talk about, he talks about the great benefit of stimulating demand in the society. And that's pure Keynesianism. And he's a broken clock, right? Sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. So that's just something about supply and demand to keep in mind. Okay, prices and the invisible hand. Market prices balance supply and demand. See that this leads into this, okay? This is the point. That prices balance supply and demand, and that tends to be important, right? That we have to not have shortages. We need to, keep the two in balance in the short run, and we want them both to grow, but something has to balance out between them. It also, market prices set relative values in the society, and what's worth more, an apple or an orange? Right? Put another way, what's worth more, a teacher or a lawyer? Now, you might not like that lawyers get more money than teachers, but the society is speaking in a very loud material voice that you get a lot more money being a lawyer than a teacher. And so, there are aspects of which we may not like that one side is being produced more, but this is a key thing, is that in our society, the things in terms of the material things in life, everything has a price, and the prices are, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. A price is an estimated value. It's a statement of, hey, what's this worth to you? What will you be willing to give me in exchange for this? And so, they tell us a lot of things, what's worth more than something else, and they guide people to doing things. And being a lawyer is not fun, and people don't like lawyers. There's not a lot of status to it, but we got a lot of lawyers because we pay lawyers a lot. We don't have a shortage of lawyers, and that you might think that's a bad thing, but the society, we go out and we get what we need. Better example than lawyers, balancing supply and demand, right? At Christmas and Thanksgiving, we're going to have turkeys. Going to be plenty of turkeys available. And because we have this incentive, we know when turkeys are there, and there's as opposed to the toys at Christmas, the opposite of the market failure example is the turkeys. Every year, turkeys in abundance show up in our supermarkets because it's a totally predictable demand, and these folks who want to make money, who are pursuing their own the turkeys show up, and we have the right number of turkeys, and there's not a shortage of turkeys. So balancing supply and demand is important. Setting the relative values in the society in a material manner that will encourage people to do what other people want in terms of producing the higher valued things when they want them is a very important organizing principle. So the macro effect of markets and prices then become that they influence people's decisions. They at a mad influence of decisions, right? They affect what is produced, where it is produced, when it is produced, how it is distributed, right? And they really become the organizing principle for most of the society. Now, again, you may detest that if you're anti-materialist, but things work, right? We don't have a lot of shortages. We get turkeys at Christmas. You can always find a gas station, and just you're not scrounging for things that you want very often. And this all works because the prices provide this organizing and this informational aspect, right? That they tell people, hey, this is worth this is worth that. What do you want to produce? And these people want, prices higher on this, more people want this, make more of it. And that's why we have generally what we want in the quantities we want it. In other words, there's an invisible hand out there, right? Prices encourage people to produce things that are either highly valued or in short supply. Prices discourage people from consuming things that are highly valued or in short supply. And, the invisible hand kind of drives things. Now, this term gets abused a lot, okay? The invisible hand is, I think, an important thing. And it explains, hey, because people are trying to meet their goals in life by satisfying other people's goals, right? Because they have to get in a voluntary exchange. They are guided to try to figure out what other people want and provide it at, and they might want to jack the price they provide it at all the way up as high as they can, but still within this thing that, hey, the other person has to be willing to pay it. So selfish people are forced in this case to consider what other people want and provide it. This is Adam Smith. He talked about the invisible hand. The general idea is, he says, we don't look to the butcher, the baker, and brewer for our evening meal out of their sense of kindness. It's not from altruism that they provide us our dinner. It's because they're looking after their own self-interest. And this isn't, like I said, this becomes the organizing principle of a market economy. A key thing about it, though, is, as I like to say, it moves people left or right, not up or down. And there is a lot of pushback on or poo-pooing of the invisible hand because it doesn't lift people up. And actually, Larry Bartels wrote a book where he did very good research about growth in incomes on people, but kind of couched it in this phrase, well, the invisible hand isn't raising people up. And I'm like, that's not what it's supposed to do, right? It doesn't make you better off. What makes you better off is if you can produce things better, or if there's more stuff around in the society. The invisible hand just organizes what we've got. It moves people left and right, tells them to become a lawyer, not a teacher, or God forbid, a frickin' professor. And it encourages people to do these things. But it doesn't, guarantee a payday, and that's a key thing about it that I think we do kind of want to understand. But as an organizing principle, it's a very efficient system for figuring out socially what the relative values are, communicating that information, and motivating people to act on it. And for a government to do it, it would be ungodly difficult. And the fact that it works is economists sometimes just sit back and marvel at it. And like I say, there is no czar of turkeys. We are going to get turkeys at Thanksgiving. That just happens, right? And it happens without anybody giving orders, without anyone doing, because the invisible hand makes it happen. Now, it doesn't guarantee that you can afford to buy a turkey, right? Or that everyone could buy one, or that you'll be able to buy more turkeys next year, but it does organize behavior in a very meaningful way. Okay. I've tried to, present these things. At times, I may seem to make a normative judgment, right, about the turkeys or these things. But these are the things that go, some of the things that go into a market economy. And I've just tried to talk about them in general. There are some deeper points to make, but it's been 51 minutes to this point, and so I'm going to have a second part that's going to go deeper into various concepts about voluntary exchange surpluses, and they're going to, it's going to be long, it's going to be bad, but I wanted to separate these out from this overview that I've just given you.